Hey, this is Suzanne, and we want to thank Thrive Academics Assessments for sponsoring Not by the Book. Unlock your students' potential with Thrive Academics Assessments. For just $25, gain unlimited access to their comprehensive online assessments for Math K-12 and Reading K-11 throughout the entire school year. Thrive Assessments are developed by Scantron Corporation and have administered over 170 million tests. They're norm referenced. You can compare your child's performance to national standards, Florida State approved assessments, computer adaptive, so you can pinpoint your student's exact skill level, online and flexible. There are no time limits, no proctor needed, and you can take tests anytime 24/7. Affordable and comprehensive. One low price of $25 for both subjects. Easy to read reports that help identify your child's strengths and weaknesses. Step Up for Students scholarships mandate an annual assessment. Thrive Academics is the best and most affordable solution. You can purchase directly from Thrive or the My Scholar Shop. Ready to see the difference? Visit the My Scholar Shop today and purchase your Thrive assessments. For more details, visit www.assessk12.com.
We have never held up homesteading or a self-sustaining way of life as anything except our personal choice for our family. Like, we want to make sure that we tell our children, you loving the Lord and seeking His will for your life is more important than what kind of foods you consume or where you get your groceries.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says, you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. In this episode, I get to talk with RuthAnn Zimmerman of Homesteading with the Zimmermans. RuthAnn has a fantastic story that will encourage you to embrace change while still holding on to the good things we learn from our childhood and our culture. We talk about homesteading, parenting, family, and the family table. Let's listen in.
So RuthAnn, as a little girl, was very carefree. My grandpa bought ponies for me. They were not always tame ponies. And my parents owned 50 acres, and we had a family milk cow, and we lived right up on the river. So I think RuthAnn as a child was probably every bit as feral as RuthAnn's sons are now.
I love that.
So we attended a little Mennonite one-room schoolhouse, and we rode our bikes with my siblings and neighbor kids, back and forth to that little one-room schoolhouse. And in many ways, now that I'm part of the more progressive modern world, in many ways, I was raised the same way as many of our listeners' grandparents were raised.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that is a great term for you to use, feral. It's lovely to consider just kind of running wild and free and living kind of just carefree in a lot of ways. But you mentioned, and I don't know that everyone that's listening will know, but you mentioned that you were Mennonite, and if I'm correct, Old Order. Is that correct? Old Order Mennonite?
Yes.
Which is like the horse and buggy Mennonite families. And so can you share a little bit more about what that meant for you as a child? You mentioned a one-room schoolhouse, and did you have 8 siblings?
Yes. So I had 8 siblings, and I'm right in the middle of 8 siblings.
Okay.
And my husband is in the middle of 13 siblings. And I always tell people, you can't get much more middle than middle of 9 and middle of 8. So the Old Order Mennonites are very similar to what most people recognize as the Amish.
Okay.
They drive horse and buggies. They shun all media, TV, radio. Some of the more modern seeking families would get the daily paper. But the difference is my family and I, like the Old Order Mennonites, do have electricity, and
Mhm.
telephones, not cell phones, but a telephone that hangs on the wall and has a cord. But
Right.
their communities are very, even though there's large communities, they don't embrace any modern inventions. So it keeps their communities very separate from the modern world. And you function well within your community. As
Mhm.
a child, I don't ever remember, wondering what the rest of the world lived like because the community was so large. The Mennonite community that I was part of was large enough to, you had your neighbors, you had aunts and uncles, and you didn't have relationships outside of the community.
Yeah. And I think too that you were in Pennsylvania. Is that accurate? Is where
Yes,
you
that's
grew up?
right.
Yeah. So I think too, you've got a large community, an extended community of families that would be Amish or Mennonite families too. So it wasn't like it was just a small pocket community somewhere. You were in a large area of those types of communities that were close knit. And I think probably just very active in your own culture and in your own family. Um, just for reference, for people who, like I said, may not know as much, for you in a day, I know there would have been a lot of chores. You would have been considered self sustaining as a family, correct?
So by the time my parents were raising their family, modern conveniences such as shopping at the grocery store were more popular because that would have been, I was born in the early 80s. So
Okay.
by the time I have memory in the 90s, there was a lot of progression, and everything that happens in the modern world eventually reaches the old order Mennonite communities. It just happens about 20 to 50 years later.
Okay.
So my parents raised us in the age of, yes, we did have a family milk cow, but I remember when we no longer had a family milk cow because it was just as easy to go to the neighbors and get milk from the dairy farm. But I was greatly influenced by my grandparents who were raised their families during the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I had to milk the cow, and we had a large garden growing up, and we did a lot of preserving. But a lot of my influence also comes from my grandma. She lived a very economical life, and waste not, want not was her motto throughout her entire life. So I kind of draw from both my everyday childhood at home and also the times that I spend at my grandma's house.
Right.
But so I think my mom would have raised us before and now, as the time went on and information became more available about the harmful ingredients that are in, most grocery store foods or even in fresh foods anymore. If you think
Right.
of fresh fruits and veggies, my mom definitely was one of the first of the Mennonite culture to kind of take a step back and start making some changes. I remember her saying with my younger siblings, I have a very vivid memory of her and dad having a conversation about vaccinations
Mm-hmm.
and how there's too many. Like we need to opt out of some or all of them, and that would have been in the late 90s. So
Right.
I was kind of had a front row seat and watching my parents embrace, modern food, and then also taking a step back and starting to question.
Yeah. Which that makes a lot of sense too, because your parents would have been raised definitely with, like you said, your grandparents being more sustainable, less grocery store items and things of that nature. Now, even with that, even with purchasing items at the grocery store and such, would you say you still did a lot of from scratch cooking at
Yes,
home?
so everything was from scratch. And when I say we purchase items at the grocery store, I'm
Mm,
talking about your staples. There was no prepackaged food to feed a family of 9 children.
right.
Everything was from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
There, we cooked with meat and potatoes and a vegetable. And on special occasions, we might buy cream cheese at the grocery store.
Right.
And we buy boxes of cereal at the grocery store. So it definitely wasn't mainstream American, household. It was still very, very different than what other people were living.
Right. Well, that's really interesting too, because I think that you're talking about how your mom started recognizing, okay, there's things in the food that we may want to step back from and things. And it's funny that you said how with the Mennonite community, it might be coming 20 or 30 years later that they'll pick up modern conveniences. And now I think it's interesting that I feel like so many families have taken 20 or 30 years to take a minute to step back and evaluate, wait, what are we doing with convenience foods? And, because even, when I was young and growing up, we didn't eat out nearly as much. There wasn't as much, drive-through convenience foods. Much more of what we ate would have been made at home, and our culture I grew up in was more Southern. So we just had a lot of, greens and peas and cornbread, things like that. And it was just very basic, very staple foods. And we just didn't go out and eat all the time. So I think that it's interesting that now I feel like so many families are starting to come back to evaluating that in the same way. And, that leads us to why I think homesteading has become, such a move and a movement now for families to get back to more natural, sustainable living. And I think it's important. And that's why I think, you've become such an inspiration to so many people too in that process. But
well, Suzanne, you know that my husband and I are adoptive parents.
yeah.
And when we took foster care classes, I remember learning that when a child's home is disrupted, when they are disconnected from the only caregivers they've ever known, they will often resort to controlling what they can, and because everything's out of control. And oftentimes the two things that they choose to control is what goes into their body and what comes out of their body. So they exercise this by either they'll eat and then they'll throw it all up, or they'll hold their bowel movements, because those are the only things that they can control, and we're all seeking to control something. And I think the homestead movement has gained momentum, because if we're all children in this country, and the older we get, the more layers that are peeled back, to our medical system, our food system, all of that, all the layers that are being pulled back. People, parents, you and I, everybody starts losing their security in, the government has our best interests, the doctors have our best interests at heart. We're like those children whose homes have been disrupted, and we start looking to control what goes into our body. And I think that is at the root of the homestead movement, is people want to control what they're feeding their families, because they've lost trust in what they're purchasing and what's available to them.
Yeah. And I think that, you talk about, and I've heard you talk on another podcast, I believe, a little bit about this. When you are not at home and having the rhythm and the repeatedness of making meals together and sitting down and having dinners together and doing that with your children over and over again, there's something there too that they're missing and that they're not, as connected to. And I think about that when I was listening to you, even then talking. I just think about all of the memories that would be lost to me if I didn't have those memories of my grandmother's kitchen, my mom's kitchen, my own household with my kids growing up young. If most of my memories were just going through a drive-through with my kids and the busyness of the days. And I think that there's just so much calling families back to the culture of the home. And I know, backing up a little bit again, so you were in your early 20s when you got married, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, and you and your husband is Elvin, right?
Yes,
And
yes,
he was raised also in the Old Order Mennonite community. So,
yes, yes.
when you got married, can you tell us a little bit about how things happened for you and Elvin as you started to grow your family and build your family?
We got married in 2000, and by the time 2023 rolled around, we had two young daughters. And, we had bought the property. Elvin worked full time. I stayed at home. That was our life. Our life was fashioned after that of our parents and our grandparents. And being a homemaker was all that was ever, required or expected of me. And I
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. I still to this day love being, it's all I've ever aspired to be, is
Mm-hmm.
to be at home and love my family well. And the family table is just such a large part of my childhood. And I never, even considered not making it part of our family's daily routine. Like,
Right.
breakfast is not everybody's rushing through the kitchen and grabbing something. We are all finishing our chores and sitting down to eat breakfast together.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how we start our day. That's the way Elvin's family started their day. It's the way my family, growing up, started their day. And it's the way that I want to start our day. But when you're no longer part of a culture where everybody around you is doing the same thing, it takes a lot more intentionality to be like, no, we will sit down and eat breakfast together. Or
Right.
no, we're going to wait and have grace before our evening meal until everybody is here and sitting. We'll just wait a little bit if somebody's still doing something. That was one of the things that we brought from our childhood, that we were intentional about. This is what we want to do in our home for our family.
Mm-hmm. And you all you were young married couple and starting your family. I know that your part of your story is that you did come out of the Mennonite culture. And can you share a little bit with us about how that happened or what your intentions were about still holding on to those things that were important to you from that culture as well?
Sure. So it was early 2007. It was probably late 2006 when my husband and I both had an encounter with the presence of the Lord, and we got saved. Like that, we just, from that moment, we knew that a personal relationship with Jesus Christ was going to be our ultimate goal in life. And because we got introduced to the Holy Spirit, we also knew that nothing else would ever bring us as much peace
Mm-hmm.
as following God's will and seeking his will for our lives. And because in the old order Mennonite culture, there is, and I'm going to try to say this not with bitterness or anything like that, and people always get upset.
Mm.
Maybe they get convicted, I don't know, but there is no room for the works of the Holy Spirit in our old order Mennonite culture. And we
Okay.
tried to make it work, but it just wasn't working. And we weren't fitting in well anymore. We weren't, following all the rules properly. So we decided to let our membership lapse. And so we're no longer members of the Old Order Mennonite Church, and we started attending a local non-denominational church, which is where we first, at one of their outreach meetings, is where we first met the presence of the Lord.
Mm.
And so leaving was a huge, huge culture shock. It was like moving to another country
Wow.
because it was probably the most monumental change in our life. Imagine, getting your driver's license at 27 years old selling your horse and buggy and using that cash to buy a minivan.
That's
Um,
crazy. Yeah.
yeah, it was wild. There was a
Mm,
lot of culture shock. And of course, we enjoyed that journey away for a couple years. But then we started looking at some of the benefits of, all religious oppression aside, right?
right.
Some of the ways we were raised, the values, the family values of the old order Mennonite culture is kind of what brought us back full circle to the life we're living now, because we started noticing how the modern world is very, I don't even know the correct word to say it, but it's kind of child geared instead of being focused on raising children to become adults. It's very child geared, like participation trophies, nobody loses. And where we were raised, in the culture that we were raised in, like, you're raised to be strong men and women, like
Mm,
emotionally strong.
right.
And be that has its pros and cons, but the family values of the old order Mennonite culture is one of the things that drew us back to the lifestyle of our heritage.
Mm. Well, that is, you said it very well. The fact that the culture today seems so geared towards the child. And, you can see a lot of the times children who don't have chores, who don't have much else to do, they're actually, a lot of the times I see almost over parenting or over providing and protecting where kids don't even have a chance to explore and refine, motor skills and things like that just because they're so confined to, a very ordered life. And I think that that's kind of, it's become more important. I think as time has passed, that people are beginning to see how there is the need for this again and how skewed it has become in our culture. But I find it very refreshing that you were still, young enough that you could have been out there exploring this whole new culture that you all walked into. But you were mature enough at the same time to recognize what was so good about, your heritage and how you had been raised. And I think sometimes, I think we all go through that a little bit where we have to look and evaluate as we move into adulthood and into building our own homes and families. What do we see that our parents did really well? And what do we want to bring into our home? And then maybe what are the things that we don't want to hold on to? And how was it with your family when you made those changes? Did you move far away from home or did you stay in the same area as your family still and maintain those relationships well?
So I want to back up and address something you said a
Mm,
couple sentences ago, where you said that you admired that we were mature enough to, recognize what was good about, the old order Mennonite culture. I think, yes, maturity plays a part in it, but
mm-hmm,
I think through healing. Like, there's a lot of Mennonites, young people especially, that when they get out from, all those religious rules, and, they embrace the modern world. They embrace everything about it. But I
right.
think the one saving grace for my husband and I is, well, number one, we already did have two children, right? So we were already responsible for the next generation. And
Right.
so we carried that heavily, but Jesus Christ in our lives and the healing that he brings, and it definitely didn't come all at once. I think that is the number one key to what helped us recognize the good in the culture that we came from.
Mm,
And then, as far as our families, there was definitely some rocky years and relationships. I had to lay relationships on the altar. There was just like, Lord, if you're going to take these relationships and I'll never, if that's how it's going to be, then I'm okay. Like, there was definitely relationships that I had to lay down on the altar, but I'm happy to say that God has restored every one of those precious relationships beyond what they were before we left the Mennonites.
Mm,
But there was definitely some rocky years, and there's definitely some people that will still avoid me, at the grocery
right.
store. But we didn't move from, the area. So we still live within the same community that we lived. We live on the same property, which is at the very edge of the Mennonite community. But we do live 1,000 miles from Elvin's family and some of my family.
Okay. Well, that is a testament, though, too. And I think that part of what your story is that you found a personal relationship with the Lord and you weren't going away in rebellion or to seek certain things in your life. You were going toward a freedom to enjoy and embrace your relationship with the Lord. It's a different motivator, for you all. So
Yes.
I know that played a role in your story. And now you have a multitude of children in your family and a couple who are older and married already. Is that correct too?
Yes.
Or
Our two oldest daughters are married. Yes.
so your home is expanding and your family is expanding. And I'm just curious. So you all have embraced the heritage that you had in the culture of the Mennonite community. How are your children as far as embracing those things as well? How would you say that has worked out for them?
So, one of the things, because my husband and I were raised in a legalistic culture where everybody's expected to follow the rules and stay within the guidelines of the church, I mean, that's actually a requirement for you to be a member.
Mm-hmm.
So, because we're still healing from that, we have never held up homesteading or a self sustaining way of life as anything except our personal choice for our family. Like, we want to make sure that we tell our children, you loving the Lord and seeking His will for your life is more important than what kind of foods you consume or where you get your groceries, because we'd rather have them follow God's will for their life instead of trying to live in a way that mom and dad approve of. So
Right.
my husband and I have been very careful to say, if you're following God's will for your life, we approve of it. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter. However, our fridge is full of milk and eggs and our freezers are full of meat. You're welcome to it. So our oldest daughter, they live close by with their son, our grandson, and so they're able to come, get milk and eggs, and every once in a while they will stop by for some meat. But most of the time, for example, I had to be somewhere, the whole family went somewhere, and I told our son-in-law, hey, if you do chores for this week, you can have a pig that's out on pasture. When it's harvest time, that's yours. So it works out like that. When we raise meat chickens, I say, if you show up on butcher day, you can fill your freezer with chicken. So it works out
Right.
well. And then our second daughter, they live in an apartment in the city, but they're, doing the Lord's work.
Mm-hmm.
And their grocery list and the foods that they eat, I'm sure look a lot different than what we consume, but that has no eternal value. And the same as my husband and I'll tell people this, we were slow to embrace the homesteading, because we already knew exactly how much work there is into it. Like, we
Right.
went into it eyes wide open, no fantasy at all. We know exactly what we're in for. And I feel like that's going to be the same with our children. Like,
Mm-hmm.
when and if they choose it, it will be eyes wide open. We know what we're in for, and this is what we're going to do. But until that point, to us, it has no eternal value. You
Mm-hmm.
live your life for the Lord, and that's all that we want for you.
Yeah, and I think that if they leave our homes, and I think that that's one of the things for any parent, when they leave our home, if they are embracing that family culture and that togetherness of family, that's much more important, like you say, than the food that they're eating or if they cook the same way or raise animals or gardens or whatever. But how do you think it is for you to instill that family culture, and maybe even how it is separate? I know the family table, like you said, is huge. So that's part of that culture that still embraces the heritage that you were raised in. And you don't have to raise your own food or your own animals to have that family table be an important part of your home and to embrace that. And I know you also have adopted children. How have they responded to, were they adopted as babies or were they adopted as young children?
Yes, they were babies, so they don't know any
They don't know
different.
any different. Yeah. So, can you share a little bit with us about that? I know we have a lot of families who adopt and have large families that have children by birth and children by adoption. And we have foster families that we are very close to. How did you choose that? And how has that impacted your family as a whole?
So there was a move of, so how did we choose foster care? Gonna try to make this story brief.
Yeah, yeah.
So so we had four biological children, and I've already said both my husband and I are from large families. And the number four baby was an emergency C-section, and we were
Mm,
told no more children, right? Because my uterus ruptured. But both Elvin and I knew that four wasn't even, that wasn't even a lot of children. Like, we knew we had the capacity because of our heritage. We knew that we had a larger capacity. So there was a move in our small church for the foster care, movement, and we became licensed, and we ended up with four placements, two adoptions, and then we had a surprise baby.
oh,
And so
wow.
the three little boys were added to our family in 2 short years.
Mm,
And through all of that, your biological children find their worth and belonging naturally, right?
right.
Um, but it, like, having adopted sons made us be very intentional about making sure that our children all have something to make them feel like they are worth, like, they belong here, like we couldn't do without them. The family meal table gives me a chance to check up on everybody, and it it's the same as the bedtime stories and the bedtime
Mm,
prayers. It's a chance to reconnect. And when you're working hard at building relationship with children that have never known anything except broken relationships, that consistency of mom will be there at mealtime and mom will be there at bedtime, it feels to me like that must just give a chance for their worthiness and their value to become very, very rooted, and confidence, and that no matter what happens, it's kind of like us as adults in our relationship with Jesus Christ. We
mm,
know that no matter what happens, that battle's already been won, and we know how this game plays out. And
yeah.
I feel like with children, having that consistent, is it chore time, is it bedtime, or is it mealtime, that no matter what happens, at the end of the day, my family is intact and my family will be there. So it just gave us an encouragement to be very intentional about the family culture that we create. And for me, being an adoptive mother, it changed my life.
Mm,
And I can't even begin to tell you how much more compassionate I am as a mother, seeing the heartbreak of the adoptive moms. And yeah, my heart has been so broken
mm.
and so healed. And during that process, the capacity for loving others and being compassionate to others, like, it just expanded my heart.
I love the way that you described that, because I know families who feel like, stopping at one or two children, honestly, that's more than they can handle. But recognizing that you had the capacity, like you said, to love more, to parent more children, and to find the way to do that, and how God has like then expanded your world and your heart and your compassion. I seeing that you have like those experiences and your experiences too, just of moving into choosing homesteading, like you said, with your eyes wide open. You knew what you were getting into. But for the families who really just are struggling with um, trying to figure out how to just do things like manage a schedule that would like put them in a position where they're making dinner time together every night, or where they sit down and have breakfast together. Are there any words of encouragement or advice that you would give to those families, because you're able to draw pretty deep from that, even as homeschooling families? It's amazing sometimes how much time you lose when you're homeschooling, and you're thinking, well, we of course we have time to sit down and have breakfast, but it gets away because of all of the other things. And a lot of the time, it's not even because of morning chores. It isn't because you have to be to school on time. It's just, I think, about priorities and being intentional. But how would you encourage someone, and how would you communicate how important those things are, so that, maybe a younger mom or a new mom that is trying to look forward would embrace that and would understand what they're missing if they don't have that?
So it's a very good question. Time management is a very, very large life skill, and it develops slowly and intentionally. And some people get to adulthood and they don't have personal time management skills. And so we work, because I get very, very frustrated when people don't have time management, when people that I'm working with don't have time
Mm-hmm.
management. So we work very hard on time management skills with our children, and we start early. I'm going to speak with grace here, hopefully. Sometimes it's not time management. Sometimes you just have more little children than you have the capacity for. And
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. That's just a season. But to those moms, I would say you have to whittle down your priorities. And like for my priorities, and I hope I never forget to speak on this, because when I first started becoming popular on social media, I broke it all down for people like, your listeners probably, who have their hands full, their houses full. There's constantly, it's time to put the baby to bed and you forget that they puked in their bed last night. You're constantly on the reaction when you have preschool age children and babies, and let alone, those that are older and you're trying to teach them, long division and multiplication. That there's three categories of priorities for myself. The number one priority is the emotional well-being of my family.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that I meet everybody's emotional needs and then move on and work on something else. It means that if a need comes up and it is an emotional need, it becomes a priority, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so next to emotional needs is nutritional needs. So for me, that looks like all of the homestead chores and cooking. That's nutritional needs. And then very last of all is housekeeping. So go through your day, and sometimes you're in the stage of life where your whole day is consumed by emotional needs, and this is most likely to happen when your children are all under 5 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and their emotional and nutritional needs are going to take up all of your time. And housekeeping is going to be a rare thing, but that's okay. You will have time to make housekeeping a priority. It's just not this month or this year. Things
Mm-hmm.
slide to the bottom. The only time that I bring housekeeping to the top is when it's affecting my ability to meet the emotional needs of the family. So let's say the house is so cluttered and dirty that I am short and cranky and have zero patience for anyone. Then it's
Right.
time for me to set aside a day and put the house in order. And
Mhm.
emotional needs will slide down a little further on that day because I know for my own sanity, I have to get the house back in shape. And the same with nutritional needs. All of the homesteading that you see us do, like the milk cow, the garden, that falls under nutritional needs. And so when I have babies, when I had three babies, and I call them all three babies because when they're newly added to the family, they take just as much care as a newborn, right? Because you're
Mhm.
building that bond. Then I am only going to garden when either they are napping or they are content on a blanket. I am not going to be able to let them cry on a blanket because my garden is so important. No, raising emotionally secure children are more important than anything you can grow in the garden. So
Mm.
just having that sliding priority list where you just know what's important, and when that comes up, you meet that need. And then to the homeschool mom, and most everybody knows that I'm not currently homeschooling. And I did at one time, but the thing is understanding, and it's like potty training. You
Mhm.
can do a whole lot of training between 18 months and 2.5 years old, but until that brain development is there, you are simply spinning your wheels. So if you have a 6-year-old that's reluctant to learn phonics, the brain development very likely just isn't there. And if you wait
Mhm.
another year, you can do in 2 months what you couldn't do in 2 years before that. And I think that all comes down to ignoring the pressures of society and
Mhm.
understanding the developing brain and the developing child properly so that you can ignore the pressures of society. Anyway,
Right.
that was a very long answer to a very good
No,
question.
a lot of really good input, though. I think that, I love your priorities and the sliding priorities. I love the way that you explain that because it really is how we functionally walk through, and especially certain seasons of our life, right? Because children grow and things change. But I love that. And, also what you're sharing about teaching your children, and it just goes so in line with, my nature. I was more inclined to say, well, if my kids are not ready, let's wait. That was definitely me. Some people deal with a lot of stress and pressure because they think it has to happen now. So I think for us to have that freedom in our homeschool world and our education with our children to say, we don't have to do it all right now. It can wait, until they're ready. It's important. It's an important reminder for people.
I think that it comes down to why am I doing this? Like, is my
Mm,
long-term goal the health and success, emotional health and success of my child, or is my goal to be a successful homeschool mom?
mm,
The different, like shifting the focus onto what do I want for my child at 18? Like,
mhm.
you can want them to be a doctor, but if they don't, if God hasn't put within them, a love of mathematics or science, then have you really succeeded?
Yeah, and it goes back to what you said at the beginning. The most important thing is for your children to do what God wants them to do and is calling them to do. Then you've been successful in guiding them to where they need to be when they become an adult and, you know,
Yes.
a young adult. And that's important. So I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I wanted just for fun, if you would share with us a little bit about all of the things that you are raising and growing and exploring in your homesteading.
Well, I know that you're in Florida, and I was
Mhm,
there
mhm.
recently, and I'm going to go there again. So this might be hard for you to imagine because I experienced the Florida sunshine very recently. We
Right.
are enjoying our very first 70-degree days, like consecutive, so multiple days
Okay.
in a row, and I am completely drunk on sunshine. Like it's just I can't get enough of it. And I don't even know what I've all planted because every day I run to the garden and I stick more seeds in just because I'm so happy.
Yeah.
But peas, like the whole peas, the ones that you take out of the shells, is going
Hmm.
to be our large crop this year because we have plenty of corn and green beans from other years. So
Okay.
we'll just be growing, a little bit of corn for fresh eating and some green beans for canning. But peas are our main crop this year. So I'll have 5 50-foot rows of whole peas. Those are double rows
Wow.
too. And I hope to get a lot of peas put in the freezer because the last couple years we haven't had a good crop and I haven't been very intentional. And we only raised enough peas for special occasions.
Mm.
So it'll be a treat if we get to put a lot of peas in the freezer. And then, of course, there's carrots and red beets. And I'm thinking of the crops that I want to preserve. The
Mm.
raspberries are doing well. I've got radishes and lettuce and, salad supplies for fresh crops.
Right.
And well, I'll take you along on my YouTube channel on garden tours and anything I missed, you'll
Hmm.
see there.
Yeah.
Blueberries, we've got started. Hopefully, we'll get a crop one of these years. And then, probably the most exciting thing as far as the animals is we are expecting 4 baby calves.
Um,
By 4th of July, they should all be here. But
okay.
that also means out of those 4 calves, 3 of the cows are milk cows.
Mm.
So I know that I don't have the capacity for 3 milk cows. And so we'll probably be making a decision this summer before winter again, which milk cows stay and which go.
Mm.
And then we just updated our breeding program with our hogs, so we're excited for some fresh baby piglets probably by fall.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, then we'll raise a bunch of meat chickens this summer and share with the kids.
Hmm.
And the fruit
Yeah.
trees are blooming. Apples, pears, cherries, and plums is what we can grow here.
That's the pears or something. I love the pears. Always apples too, but I love the pears. And pear butter. I don't think anybody really always knows what I'm talking about when I say pear
I know
butter.
what pear butter is. Yeah,
You know what pear butter is.
I
And
do
I
know what pear
love
butter is.
it's amazing. It's amazing. So um
Pear butter on fresh warm bread with homemade butter. Yeah,
yes.
it's really, really good.
Yeah. And if you don't have those fresh pears, it's like hard to imagine, So
Yes, yes.
but that sounds exciting. And I know you have a book that is just coming out, correct?
Yes. So the book is available for pre-order now. It's The Heart of the Homestead by RuthAnn Zimmerman,
Mm-hmm.
and it will start shipping early September.
Okay. So that's exciting. And what is the focus mostly?
It's about exactly what we talked about. It's a lot about
Okay.
homesteading, but every chapter, regardless if I'm talking about the family milk cow or the garden, every chapter brings it back home to the heart behind why we do what we do. It's not
Mm-hmm.
to be successful homesteaders, or I should say, my heart behind why we do what we do is to touch your children's lives and
Yeah.
through relationship, encouraging them to have a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I can't wait to read it. I'm so excited about it.
Oh, thank
And
you.
the one last question for you, because this is one of my personal interests. Do you quilt?
I actually really love to quilt.
Do you?
I have minimal experience with piecing quilts, like sewing
Hmm.
them together, but sitting down by a quilt frame with my aunts and cousins and grandmas is one of my dearest, fondest memories. So I really, really love to hand quilt.
That's amazing. I love quilts and I always am so intrigued by them when I see them and the stories behind them. And my grandmothers used to make them, and you would see clothes that people wore that looked the same as the quilt that you were sleeping with. So it was so much fun to learn about them. So I was curious if that was something that you did. But well, thank you. I just am so excited. You're going to be in Florida at FPEA in just a couple of weeks, and I'm really excited to see you here then. And you can definitely soak up some sunshine here.
Oh, I plan to.
It is going to be high and mighty. But we look forward to it. Thank you so much for sharing your story and Homesteading with the Zimmermans, is where people can find you. And again, it's such an inspiration to me to hear stories and to hear, how people's lives have been impacted by just sharing their heart and their stories with people. I know that so many people are inspired by watching you and listening to you. And so thank you for being out there and transparent with everyone. And I know it's work, it's extra work for you, but it's appreciated. So I just
Well,
wanted to say
thank
that.
you. Thank you for having me. One of the things that I think people don't realize, I live out in the middle of nowhere.
Mm,
There's nothing like I can see for miles, but I can't see people and I don't see people. But I am a very, very social person. So meeting people on social media and sharing things, it's a social outlet for me that I otherwise wouldn't get. I'd have to, get in my car and drive to town for. So it
right.
really isn't work. It's a very necessary part of my
Yeah.
survival and my emotional health, to interact with people throughout the day.
Mm, that's great. Also, I was just thinking, as we're talking, I love to ask a question about quotes or passages, maybe things your grandparents said to you, or a quote from a famous book or scripture. What do you have that you maybe hold on to as words that encourage you or that, play over in your mind when you're just like, this is a day I need to remember this? What do you hold on to?
I think that one of the biggest things, and especially, this time of year when things start growing and I start worrying that I can't keep up with everything,
Mm,
I have a tendency to become anxious instead of just slowing down and enjoying the spring and how everything's growing. And I, have to remind myself that the children are what's important, right? As
mm,
much as I practice it this time of year, it's hard for me. I'd have to be intentional about remembering. And the verse, whatsoever you do, do it wholeheartedly as unto the Lord, always brings everything back into perspective for me. And especially, now with the social media presence and, with YouTube and my book coming out, I want to wake up. And I've been in the position where I've held things that became idols to me. They were gifts from God and they became idols to me.
mhm,
And so I try to get up and say, Lord, if you were to take it all away, I would still honor you, I would still love you, and I would still do what I'm doing. And that just helps put things in perspective. It helps me make sure that my identity is in Jesus Christ and not in the number of followers or the number of views I get
mhm,
or the number of books I've sold. That has zero impact on my personal salvation.
mhm,
So trying to wake up every day and say, Lord, I'm here to serve you in whatever capacity you need me today, I'll show up. And so with my social media, I always tell God, as long as the door stays open, I will share. And when you close it, I will quit.
That's funny. I appreciate that so much because even with what I do now, serving in FPEA and just director of events here and things like that, so many times I have said, when it's done, when God says we're done, I'm done. And I'll be happy with that because we'll be moving on to the next whatever it is He has for me.
And
Right?
you
So,
know that you don't want to live a day without that peace of knowing that
yeah.
you're being obedient. And knowing what that peace feels like is what helps me understand God's faithfulness and understand obedience and how important it is.
Oh, yeah. And it is. It's that peace. I thank you so much for sharing that because that verse is such a strong reminder to the purpose in our days. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It was nice to visit with you.
Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at fpea.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.